Okay, we resume our hearings and we now submission 411 and it's Derek Thompson. Welcome. Thanks, Derek. Now you can either stand or sit, whatever. Kia
ora tātou, nā reini tira, Mayor and councillors, good afternoon. Sorry, my voice is a bit croaky, so just in the recovery. I'm fine. I just need to point out that I'm actually speaking to two submissions.
Yeah.
We'll deal with the one from myself and my wife first, and then offer apologies from Nancy. So I'd like to introduce council to a whakatauki or a proverb, a Māori proverb. And it goes, "He rea te waka ki te whetu, kaore ki te titiwai," which basically translates to, tie your waka to a star, not a glowworm. So in Pākehā vernacular, go big or go home. From the documentation, it seems in the proposal documents that council is setting some lofty goals. So you're on the go big side of the proverb in some ways. My interpretation of the documentation, you have some new activity that have not been part of previous LTP cycles. But the four biggies, if you like, are paying off debt quickly, breaking even budget-wise in 5 years, accumulating funds for resilience response in terms of natural disasters, etc., and then fully funding depreciation for future investment. All laudable aims, but I would ask what is achievable. Coming back to the whakatauki, it has a cautionary element, kore ki te titiwai, saying don't mistake your star for a glowworm. Make sure your goal is the correct goal. So sometimes things look like the right thing to do when that may not actually be in the best interests. So my kind of view and reading of the documentation is that if I stick to the waka analogy, we're turning a large boat on a dime versus slow incremental adjustments over a longer time period. And that to me was evident in the rates graph, where we've got a big spike in the first 3 years and then it drops back to much smaller rate increases. The other element of the proposal documents could be interpreted as, let's pull up the drawbridge and isolate the city. And I would argue that council is in a tough position, but also has more obligations than fiscal obligations only. And I think it's Section 10 of the Local Government Act talks about promoting the social, the economic, the environmental, and the cultural well-being of communities in the present and in the future. Given that the 2018 census, albeit is a little bit out of date, but the 2023 figures aren't available till next month. But 2018 census said the median income in Upper Hutt City was $35,400, with 80% of residents earning less than $70,000 per annum. Such a large increase in rates will impact everyone in the city, not only homeowners, but will be passed on through rents. I also am concerned about unwaged pensions. And we also are facing, as you've heard already this morning, an economic crisis, and the largest employer in the region is significantly downsizing. So, you know, reference to central government, obviously, but I am aware that you know, rates rebate has increased, and there is an option of rates deferral. But I would urge councillors to consider what else could be done for those that have that need. And I'm also curious in terms of the role of central government, given that just this week Auckland's water crisis was bailed out to some degree, and wondering what activity and opportunities exist apart in the Greater Wellington Centre. Yeah. So that was all I wanted to say in terms of my submission.
No, any questions? Yeah. Councillor Slides?
Thank you for coming along and presenting, and certainly take on board, you know, that 84% of our people commute into Wellington. I'm not saying that they are all employed by the big beehive down there, but I'm sure a number of them are. So with us having to weigh all of that up, where would you say, and I totally agree with you that we probably need to focus on the needs rather than the wants, where would you say would be an affordable place, talking about the average median wage that you've given us and the percentage of that are under 70? Where do you think we should land? Obviously, it's not the 20.
Yeah, that's but I'll identify I'm one of those people who commute to Wellington to work every day.
Thank you.
Fortunately, my job's secure, but I have a daughter whose job is being closed off. I think the challenge is in the timing. So clearly, ideally, council needs to come on budget. Doing that and introducing funding for new elements in a short time frame is not realistic. I know for certain that I'm not going to get a 57.9% increase in income in the next 3 years. And I would be surprised if anyone in this room was in the same boat, wasn't in the same boat. To answer your question specifically, I think evening out the rates increases 8 to 10% over the 10 years might be a goal to aim for. I'm aware that, you know, there's always difficult choices and trade-offs. So you're saying, and you're asking the public, what do we stop? What do we defer? What could we introduce as a new option that is less expensive than options on the table? In my submission, there are a couple of areas I thought could be stopped, but I haven't got the expertise or would profess to be able to you know, go into a lot of detail in that space.
Thank you. Thanks, Derek. Yeah, your second submission?
Second submission is on behalf of the Tawai Park Community Garden Incorporated Society. And I'd like to say that council has been a great supporter of our small not-for-profit organisation. We don't have any income streams. We find ourselves in a funny situation where council created the community garden and then some years ago required those operating it to essentially enter into a licence to occupy. The licence to occupy is the equivalent of a lease and puts conditions on the occupants. One of those conditions is the water we use is charged. So we're metered and we're charged. And when we've raised this with councillors and with officials, the answer has been to apply for contestable community grants to pay for the water charges. So we're in this funny space where the community development part of council gives us money, the parks part of council charges us money, and we pay the parks charge from the community development funds via our bank account. I would submit that the transaction costs are more than the funding you receive anyway. So that's just by the by, but we can go into detail later. The Community Garden Corporate Society notes that the council's proposal is to stop all community grants. We would therefore respectfully ask that if that happens, the charging of water rates is waived for our community garden. We also consider it interesting that not all community gardens in Upper Hutt charge water rates. So from our inquiries. So we just find it a bit of a silly situation all around. I also wanted to just make the point that coming back to that section of Local Government Act about the economic, cultural and community wellbeing, there is a lot of goodwill that operates across the city, and a lot happens at no charge to the city by volunteers such as our organisation. And we don't begrudge that at all. It's what we're committed to, it's our purpose. But one of the trade-offs that council needs to be considering is what is the impact on the goodwill across the communities of Upper Hutt. So, thank you.
Thank you. Just questions, Councillor Griffiths?
So your comments are around gardens and Tawai. The biggest concern you have is any charges that we're charging you versus the grants funding that you need to apply to. So if the grants just hypothetically were to stay in, are you happy to continue to apply for grants and pay your waterways?
It's a pathway forward. It's not an efficient pathway, in the sense that in the last 12 months, the water charges for our garden was $80.
12 months.
So by the time you send us an invoice quarterly,
Thank you.
by the time you fund the processing of applicants for a contestable grant and consider our grant, and as I said in my submission, if we are successful, then there's an opportunity cost for somebody else who's not successful. Which is, I'll underline the word silly. We're in a silly situation.
Councillor Bentley?
Thank you for coming to speak. How the garden's going? Is
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So good.
We have a membership of about 40. Like all voluntary not-for-profit organisations, we have a smaller membership that are regulars. We do a range of kind of activities to engage the community. Councillor Griffiths and the Mayor have been to some of our pre-COVID fun days. Most recently, last month, we ran a composting workshop. So, looking at some of the sustainability elements across the city. We do suffer from being in a public space. So, we charge water rates, but we don't control the tap 24/7. We have some, I call it petty vandalism that we deal with from time to time. We also, over the years, have been the recipient of some donated goods, i.e. waste, that we don't really want. So we've managed that and taken care of those issues, be they car tyres or elements of home appliances that aren't required, bits of cars, various bits and pieces. So the overall picture is positive. We grow food, we don't do an individual allotment, we don't charge rent, so we have no income other than fundraising. And the food is utilised across the community. So, and as I said at the beginning, council has been a very good supporter of the garden, so acknowledge that quantity.
Any other questions from here? Thank you. Thanks, Derek. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Now go to submission 441, which is Eric Cains from the Wellington Branch New Zealand Farm Forest Association.
I think he's just outside.
Sorry, Wayne, what was the number? 441.
441.
Page on that one?
Sorry.
It's page 83.
Afternoon. Welcome.
Eric Cains,
Eric, yep, and welcome down here. You can either sit over there or we can stand, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Oh, I can stand as long as I can see my tops for presentation.
Sorry, did we say 441?
441.
441. Oh,
Page 83.
oh, yeah.
slideshow.
Is that not working? Right, thank you, councillors. So I'm Eric Cairns. I'm a resident of Mangaroa Valley Road and I own a small forestry block there and also secretary for the Wellington Farm Forestry Association.
It doesn't have to go on all screens? Yes. No. Thank you.
Right. Right, our issue was single issue relating to the differential, proposed differential rating for forestry. I'm struggling to understand the rationale behind that because at this stage only minor mention of elevated risk from weather-related events. That makes it a little harder, I think, to prepare a submission around what it is you need to know, because I don't know what's in the minds of council. We can only imagine that the aftermath of Cyclone Gabriel and precursor cyclones there, and particularly in Tawai Bay and so around Nelson the year before on the granite shores over there, has somehow predisposed an attitude that plantation forestry activities pose a higher risk or expense for ratepayers. But our submission is that forestry activity should be welcomed in our own community. Sorry, there's quite a lot of text on there. I have a lot of points I'm trying to make, because it is somewhat open-ended. I'd like to point out that with Gisborne Tolaga Bay, that the Tolaga Bay event was the only region with large amounts of forestry debris, contrary to media and public opinion. And that since the first issues up there, harvesting practices have changed in the last few years, and there have been significant changes in the National Environmental Standard for Commercial Forestry, which came into action, I think, in November. For instance, those commercial standards now restrict the amount of slash that can be left on slopes and might pose a downstream risk. Now, that is only for orange and red zone land under the forestry scheme, of which there is no such land on the side of the Rimbutuckas. Our erosion susceptibility was considered not to trigger those thresholds when you look at it under a national basis. It is not generally known that when scientists analyse the debris on the beaches on the rivers after Cyclone Gabriel, I've said northern Wairarapa, but it's really Hawke's Bay, Wairoa and Gisborne, that only 2 to 6% of that woody debris was carbon slash from forestry. 94 to 98% of the woody debris came from somewhere else, not from harvest debris. So this, I'm sort of quoting someone else here, but really the rest of that woody debris could be argued to originate from protection forestry, including native and riparian planting that toppled under extreme weather events, which, as we all know, forestry, trees on hillsides is the best way to prevent downstream issues. You've got stream bank erosion, you've got a lot of the protection willows and so on, many, many miles of those on the Hawke's Bay area that were ripped out and caused most of the damage. Besides which, most of the damage was actually caused by silt. The houses are red-stickered on the basis of silt, not by logs. And that most of that silt has come off pastoral land, not from forestry or native bush areas. And this is somewhat related issue to national carbon liabilities and so on. Enormous amounts of carbon were lost along with the topsoil. So we're really saying, in a nutshell, that woody vegetation, including plantation forestry, is still regarded as the best way of reducing flooding, sediment issues downstream. Put a slide in here about plantation costs of the community. I'm saying it's, there's a lot of benefits here. Commercial forestry poses very little additional risk to our infrastructure compared to native bush or mixed species trees. Often roadside trees that are damaging infrastructurally, wiring and bridges and so on, are not part of managed commercial forestry. I'm trying to think of instances where commercial forests around Upper Hutt are actually alongside the road. 1 or 2 in Whitelands Valley, Bulls Run Road maybe, 1 or 2 in the Akatarras, but by and large the roadside trees are not commercial forests. And therefore one asks how it is that commercial forestry is seen as a threat to infrastructure. The National Environmental Standards Commercial Forestry now requires setbacks, actually roads only and where it's shading, but setting from water bodies, 10 metres from rivers and 5 metres from small streams. Forest owners have been paying rates for 30 years of services they may not use, and then use heavy trucks for a short harvest period. And this is, I'm sort of saying, this is the typical forest, and not all forests are the same. Takes between 25 to 35 years. We're a bit slower in this region, usually 30, 35 years before you harvest the standard pine. There are many other commercial forests which are not pine trees, they're mixed species, different length rotations, different methods of harvest. Logging trucks are often blamed for roading damage, but I live on Mungarai Valley Road. I will tell you that the logging trucks are outnumbered about 20 to 1 by gravel trucks to and from the quarry and to elsewhere. And you could easily do a survey on Wallisville Hill Road, and not that many logging trucks compared to all the other trucks. I do need to point out that plantation forestry is part of the urban fibre rural economy, but with significant better environmental outcomes. Seem to have skipped aside and moved things around there. I'll see, we'll come back to it, but there's a 75% differential offered to rural properties greater than 30 hectares at present. I guess on the premise that they're producing meat or wool or beef or whatever, besides which grazing horses, we won't too far down that line. But I'm saying that plantation forestry should be part of that same sector. Well, I think the next slide can cover that a bit better. Not that I just want to cover that. So it has been quoted about 10 years ago from one of our former patrons who was with high up in forest research, that the global per capita requirement for wood is 2.4 kilograms per day. That's a way to find quite large, more than food. And this is that wood is part of your fibre, part of your basic human requirements: food, shelter, food, water, and shelter. It's part of that setup. So why should we be penalising? Right, stability of our hillsides here. I have a paper I can reference, part of a study commissioned by Hawke's Bay Regional Council, where our grey wacky hill soils, actually under pasture on that particular publication, 10 to 16 times more stable than some of the soils on the Hawke's Bay. If you took forested grey wacky hills, it's even more stable than the slippery stuff we're seeing in the Hawke's Bay and Gisborne.
You might want to just wrap up, Mr. Cains, because you're 10 minutes up if we've got questions.
Right, okay. Well, look, the main thing really is that plantation providing enormous ecosystem services to the community free of charge. And that has been quantified some years ago as about $5,000 per hectare of forest per year. You can read the slides there. It's quicker than I can come out, but there is all sorts of evidence to back that up. So that's the. I think really that proposing a 500% differential rating will penalise forestry. It will damage the economy, damage the local economy, will put individual forest owners out of business. Their land will be worthless. There's nowhere to go. The land use is locked up under the under the carbon scheme, where pre-1990 land, most of it forestry is pre-1990. People didn't really have a choice about whether it's going to stay on forestry or not. They were paid out a small number of carbon credits. They're no longer able to earn on that land. If you put people out of business, they've nowhere to go. They can't easily change land use. The land will be worthless. So I think I should stop there. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Any questions? Councillor Bentley?
Yeah, thank you for coming to speak. Are you able to tell us a bit more about the cash flow of the forestry business? Because obviously you pay off on a block every 30 years. How do you typically pay for the rates over that?
Well, the bigger companies, of course, have continuous harvesting, so they've got cash flow, but a private owner won't. They've got to fund all that up front. In forestry economics, there's a discount cash flow amortised, if you like, and yes, costs early on costs compound. So yes, they're funding it out of other income streams. Yes.
Councillor Sparks?
Thank you for coming, Eric. So with regard to could you give us a comparison as to what is the rates that you're paying now as to what you have estimated? Because I'm sure you and your colleagues have done some sums of what the extra 500%.
Right, look, for myself, I'm on a lifestyle lot with a resident on site, so obviously the capital value is a bit higher. The City Council part of that component is $3,000 per year at the moment. This is on the 100%, not the 75%. Within 3 years, under 500% and the 20% fair increase for 3 years, that will go up to $22,000 per annum within 3 years, and you amortise that over 30 years, so you're probably up over $1 million. The forestry doesn't pay those sort of bills.
So the cost of trees at the moment is dipping, isn't it?
It is at the moment. Look, we harvested 2 hectares of pines about 5 years ago. They were all pruned up. I put a lot into them. half of what went out the gate was burn butts, but we netted $80,000 off 2 hectares 5 years ago. But we did exceptionally well compared to the average estate.
Councillor Kerry?
Thanks. When you're talking about your plantations here, are you talking about indigenous or are you talking about exotic as well? And
Plantation forestry can be indigenous if it's onto clean land, but in terms of the ability of forests to hold soils together and prevent erosion and sediment, plantation forestry that's harvested every 30 years is very little difference in performance that in permanent forests of any kind.
Councillor Thompson?
Thanks for coming along. You've obviously put a lot of thought into your submission. Have you put any thought into how else we could rank for a forestry property of your nature? And obviously, if you're forestry and you're predominantly forestry on your land, it's a different beast. You're living in your residence. You've got a little bit of forestry on your land. Have you thought anything about how else we could look at it?
Look, I did have a slide there suggesting that were a forestry specific rate to go ahead, and I'm not in favour of that, but it could be done on a per hectare basis or on a per hectare of roadside, depend where someone perceived the greatest risk to infrastructure to come from. And I do think that needs thinking through very carefully, because I'm saying the majority of forests are well away from infrastructure and don't pose a risk. And they're actually providing their protection forests. The council should be paying the forest owners for environmental services, not rated out of business the other way around.
You're currently
sorry, just to follow up for the exotic, you've said there that it contributes to the ecology and that. I'm just wondering how lost the term, but a non-indigenous plantation actually contributes to the ecology of biodiversity.
Well, a lot of insect-eating birds live in pine forests. Some of the pine forests in the South Island have had amongst the highest densities of native birds in them recorded. I don't have the number, but I know the data was there in Tree Grower magazine. They provide habitat for nesting for pigeon and tui and so on. They're not a monocultural desert, as some people would have you believe. I think you came up to the Stanton Park thing with us a year or so ago. The amount of regen under those 30-plus-year-old pines is amazing. Just chock-a-block full of podocarps and so on. And besides which, streams and riparian areas are not planted and exotic. So.
Councillor Beattie?
Thank you, Worship. Do you get one rates bill for all of your land currently?
Yes, I do. Yes.
So,
in installments.
But one bill, it's one title. So the capital value of your house would then be charged at 500% at a forestry level rather than just the forestry stuff under this proposal.
If it were on capital value, yes, that would be the case.
So that's getting caught in with your forestry operations and penalised, even though it's just your house.
I think the mere fact that it is a lifestyle block with amenity values close to town puts the capital value up regardless of the dwelling.
No, I'm just trying to say under this proposal, your house would be charged at 500% as well.
No,
I'm sure it won't.
no.
The intention would be that it would be the forestry area would be charged at the differential 5, and the house would be, we have to do work to carve out the house and write that at 1.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, no further questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. Righto, next is Rowan Hale, and that's at 2 o'clock. Now it's lunch. Now it's lunch.
Yeah, it's